The crying boy. The boy sat alone on a cold metal bench near the dimly lit road, his small body trembling as he hugged his knees. The city lights flickered in the distance, but here, in this part of the street, darkness had already settled. His eyes, swollen from crying, darted around, hoping, begging that someone would stop and help him. He had been sitting there for hours, watching people pass by, their faces indifferent. Some stole a quick glance at him before looking away, while others pretended not to see him at all. No one asked him if he was okay. No one cared. His stomach growled, his body ached, and his throat was dry from sobbing. He had tried speaking to a few strangers, tugging at their sleeves, pleading, "Please, can you help me find my home?" But they either ignored him or muttered an excuse before hurrying away. As the night deepened, the boy's fear grew. He didn't understand why no one wanted to help him. Was it because he looked dirty? Because he was alone? He tried to recall how he got here, but his mind felt foggy, memories slipping away like sand through his fingers. Then, in the distance, he saw a man walking alone. The boy hesitated. He had already been rejected by so many, but something about this man felt different. He wasn't rushing like the others. Maybe he would listen. The boy stood up, wiped his tears, and stepped into the man's path. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Sir, please help me." The man, startled, looked down at him. Unlike the others, he didn't ignore him. Instead, he crouched down, his face showing concern. "Hey, what's wrong? Why are you out here alone?" I don't know where my house is," the boy said, his voice breaking. "No one is helping me." The man, Rajiv, sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He had just finished a long day at work and wanted nothing more than to go home, eat, and sleep. But looking at the boy, something inside him softened. "All right, listen," Rajiv said gently. "I live nearby. You can stay with me tonight. Tomorrow, we'll go to the police and find your home, okay?" The boy hesitated. He had never gone with a stranger before. But Rajiv's voice was calm, kind, and more than anything, he didn't want to be alone anymore. "Okay," he whispered. As they walked together, Rajiv noticed something odd. The street lights flickered as they passed, and the air felt colder than before. A strange silence surrounded them, as if the city had gone completely still. Rajiv shook off the eerie feeling. It was just exhaustion, nothing more. But if he had looked back at the bench, he would have seen something truly terrifying. The faint outline of another shadow sitting there, watching them go. The boys passed. Rajiv unlocked the door to his apartment and stepped inside, motioning for the boy to follow. The warm glow of the lights flickered slightly as the boy entered, his small feet hesitant on the polished floor. The room was modest but welcoming. An old sofa, a small dining table, and shelves lined with books. "Sit down," Rajiv said, gesturing to the couch. "Are you hungry?" The boy nodded weakly. His face was pale, and his eyes carried a weight far beyond his years. Rajiv quickly heated up some leftover dal and rice, placing it in front of him. The boy hesitated for a second before digging in, eating in small, careful bites. As he ate, Rajiv sat across from him. "What's your name?" The boy stopped chewing. A flicker of confusion passed over his face. I think it's Aryan." Rajiv frowned. "You think?" The boy lowered his spoon. "I don't remember everything clearly. I just know I was going home, but something happened. I don't know what." His fingers gripped the edge of the plate, his eyes staring into the distance, as if trying to pull memories from the dark corners of his mind. A strange chill ran through Rajiv. "Where do you live?" Aryan shook his head. "I don't know. I remember a road and a car, bright lights. Then everything went dark." He shuddered. "I was on the ground and people were walking past me, but no one helped. I kept calling out, but no one stopped." Rajiv felt a deep unease settle in his chest. He had heard of accidents where bystanders ignored the injured, but something about Aryan's words sent a shiver down his spine. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, filling the quiet room. Rajiv cleared his throat. "Don't worry. We'll go to the police in the morning. They'll help us find your home." Aryan nodded slowly, but didn't seem convinced. His hands trembled slightly as he finished his food. Later that night, Rajiv set up a small bed for Aryan in the guest room. "If you need anything, I'm right in the next room," he said, trying to reassure the boy. Aryan stood in the doorway for a moment. "Rajiv, uncle?" Rajiv raised an eyebrow. "Yeah?" The boy hesitated before whispering, "Do you hear it?" Rajiv frowned. "Hear what?" Aryan looked around nervously. "Someone. crying. A cold sensation crawled up Rajiv's spine. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. He forced a smile. "It's just your imagination. Get some sleep." Aryan didn't look convinced, but he nodded and went inside. Rajiv lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. The boy's story, his missing memories, the way the streetlights flickered as they walked. It all felt wrong. Then, just as he was about to drift off to sleep, a soft, distant sob echoed through the apartment. Rajiv's eyes snapped open. His breath hitched. It was faint but unmistakable. A child's cry, coming from somewhere inside his house. The horrifying truth. Rajiv's blood ran cold. The soft sobbing echoed through the apartment, sending chills down his spine. He sat up in bed, his ears straining to locate the source. The sound was faint, almost distant, yet it felt like it was coming from inside the walls. He hesitated before stepping out of his room. The apartment was dark, the silence unnerving. His pulse quickened as he approached Aryan's room. Slowly, he pushed the door open. The bed was empty. The blanket lay in a crumpled heap, but Aryan was nowhere to be seen. The window was shut and the door had been locked from the inside. Panic surged through Rajiv's chest. "Aryan?" he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. The crying stopped. A suffocating stillness filled the air. Then a faint voice spoke behind him. "I don't want to go back." Rajiv spun around. Aryan stood in the hallway, his face hidden in shadows. Rajiv exhaled in relief. "You scared me, kid. What are you doing out here?" Aryan didn't answer. He was trembling. His eyes, once filled with fear, now looked empty. "They're calling me," he whispered. "But I don't want to go." Rajiv's unease deepened. "Who's calling you?" Before Aryan could answer, a loud knock rattled the front door. Rajiv jumped. Who would come at this hour? He cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole. A uniformed officer stood outside. Rajiv opened the door, still shaken. "Yes, officer." The man's face was grim. "Sorry to disturb you at this hour. We're investigating a case. There was an accident yesterday afternoon. A young boy was hit by a car. He didn't survive." A strange coldness gripped Rajiv's chest. "Oh, okay. But why are you telling me this?" The officer pulled out his phone and showed Rajiv a picture. Rajiv's breath caught in his throat. It was Aryan, the same boy standing behind him. "That's impossible," Rajiv stammered. He's right here." He turned around. Aryan was gone. The hallway was empty. The room where he had slept was eerily still, the bed untouched, as if no one had ever been there. Rajiv's head spun. His body trembled. I fed him, talked to him." The officer's face darkened. "You're not the first to say that." Rajiv's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "We've received multiple reports," the officer said grimly. "People saw the boy crying on the street, begging for help. Some ignored him, some tried to help. But everyone who saw him faced something terrifying that night." Rajiv swallowed hard. What happened to them? They all had nightmares of dying. Some woke up screaming. Others felt like someone was crying in their ears. A few even reported shadows lurking in their homes. "But," the officer hesitated. "You're different." Rajiv frowned. "Different how?" The officer studied him. "You actually let him in. You spoke to him, fed him, took care of him." A chill spread through Rajiv's veins. "And what does that mean?" The officer's expression was unreadable. "We don't know, but unlike the others, nothing bad happened to you." A sudden gust of cold wind swept through the apartment. Rajiv shivered. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, a faint whisper echoed. "Thank you." Rajiv's breath hitched. He knew that voice. "Aryan." The officer didn't seem to hear it. He simply sighed and said, "If you experience anything strange, let us know." Rajiv barely managed to nod as the officer walked away. He slowly closed the door, his heart still pounding. For the first time that night, the apartment felt truly empty. Aryan was gone. But Rajiv couldn't shake the feeling that something had stayed behind, watching, waiting. And in the silence of the room he couldn't help but wonder, why was he the only one spared? The end.